You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics because we have, and public policy, because we have as our guest Ted Dabrowski. And Ted, the short of it is he knows economics, he knows finance, he knows the private sector, he knows the advocacy sector. You know, he's now at WirePoints. He's the president of WirePoints. You can find them wirepoints.com. And we're taping this show on February 28th, 2 days after this. Let's see if we can get a shot of that. Can we get that? Okay. That is Lightfoot and Preckwinkle. Lori Lightfoot, Tony Preckwinkle are now the two people who are in the runoff for mayor of the city of Chicago. On February 26th, bit of a surprise. A lot of people were going with the chalk. They were saying Preckwinkle and Daley. Preckwinkle and Daley. Daley slid out. But the main thing here, Ted, the main thing, what is the main issue now? What was the major issue when we had 14 candidates running for mayor? And what's the major issue now that we have two candidates in the runoff? Tony Preckwinkle, the current Cook County Board president, and Lori Lightfoot, who was on the police board, Chicago Police Board, president of the police board. She was a partner at Mayor Brown, well-known international law firm, large law firm in Chicago, does a lot of business with the city of Chicago, coincidentally, and a former prosecutor. And so, with all of that baggage and background, what should have been the what is the major issue now that these two candidates should be talking about?
Well, if you go back before the election, you had 14 candidates, lots of noise, lots of difficulty in getting traction for all of them, right? Competing interest. The big issue for them was just trying to get recognition, trying to rise above the fold so you get to the top two. And so I think what you found is that, well, first we had very low participation in voting, so I think the issues are not being touched yet. People aren't fired up about things yet.
What's the major issue? Major issue.
Well, no, but to get to the point,
Okay.
nothing was being discussed. Okay.
Nothing substantively.
Nothing substantively. Right. Nobody was talking about how to fix Chicago. Now that you're down to two people, for me the question is, do either one of them, can they come up with a plan to fix Chicago? And my argument is they won't. They're too much part of the system. They're too much backed by too many special interest groups. They won't fix Chicago. But that really is the question. Can they come up with a plan to fix Chicago?
If you were advising Lori Lightfoot, okay? Because, Ted, you were the VP of policy for 6 years at the Illinois Policy Institute. You were in corporate and finance and business economics, whatever, deals at Citicorp. Citicorp? Mm-hmm. Citibank, is that how we
Citibank, yeah.
Citibank,
sure.
For what, like 16 years, okay? And you got an undergraduate degree from Georgia Tech. You got a MBA from Wharton. Mm-hmm. You and your colleague, you know, your fellow alum. What's the guy's name? Trump? Yeah.
He's a Wharton guy too.
He's a Wharton guy, but he was only there for 2 years. You were there for an MBA.
Correct.
You were there for an MBA. He was an undergraduate. You should call up Donald and you could tell him a few things. Okay, but seriously, and you're at Harris School. So you're the perfect guy to advise her. So Lori says, I need some fresh advice. You know, it's February 28th. The runoff is April 2nd. You understand my political issues, but you understand the economics. And you say something has to be done to fix Chicago, right? Give me your best shot. What should I be saying to the people? What should I...
Did you accidentally summon me?
That's okay. Cinema Verite. We got a little bit...
It's supposed to be off.
That's okay. Ted's going to turn his phone off as directed before 5 minutes ago. Okay. So the thing is, I am, you know, I'm Lori Lightfoot, and I say, just tell me, what do I run on for the next month in terms of pensions? Because I'll be quiet. What do I run on in terms of pensions? I, Lori Lightfoot, asking Ted Dabrowski, president of WirePoints.
Well, let's get this straight. Lori Lightfoot's not going to ask me for my views on pensions because we're far apart on that.
No, pretend she is.
No, well, let's be clear because we
Okay.
have two different worlds, right?
Okay.
Lori Lightfoot has said she will not amend the Constitution. She's already said that. She said she will not look at how to reform pension benefits going forward. So at this point, we're very far away because our argument at Wire Points and my argument is that Chicago is effectively bankrupt. If you look
Why? Go ahead. Yeah,
if
go
you look
ahead.
at their pensions, if you look
Yeah.
at the amount of debt, if you look at how big of an outlier Chicago is relative to the rest of the country with its debt, it's an outlier in terms of its credit ratings. It is a junk-rated city already, and CPS is 5 notches into junk rating. There are huge problems. And if Lori Lightfoot has come out and said she will not ask for a constitutional amendment, we're already way far off because you will not fix Illinois or Chicago if you don't fix the pension system.
So I
And
ask
let me
you
say it
again.
differently.
I ask you
Let me
again.
say it
Yeah.
differently. Let me say it differently.
Yeah.
If her plan is to increase taxes more, right? You've got a
Don't
situation.
swivel your chair. My
You've
tip
got
to
you've
you,
got
don't
you've got a
swivel your chair.
situation in
Yeah.
Chicago where there's too much debt and people are leaving.
Yeah.
And her big predicament will be, and we're talking about Lori, but it's the same thing for Tony, is how do you fix the debt problem without chasing more people away and more businesses away? And the way they're talking about it with more tax hikes across the board, then all you're going to do is kick the can down the road on fixing the pension problem and at the same time lose people. And that's the spiral that Chicago
Lori
can't
did
afford.
say just a week ago, when I asked her after the WTTW forum, press conference at WTTW, this was February 18th, 2019, a week before, to be precise, 8 days before the election. I said, you know, Lori, you talked about having a lot of bandwidth for this job. You have to have bandwidth. It's a current term, whatever that means. Okay, given that you have to have a lot of bandwidth, talking about bandwidth, how would you solve the $70 billion hole? It's really more, it's higher than that, but let's say conservative estimate, because that is the hole for the 4 pension funds for the state of Chicago. Moody's says it's $42 billion. And CPS, which is really Chicago's, $27 billion. So before we get things like retirement benefits and all that, $70 billion. How would you do that? And she said, well, first we got to be more efficient. Because you can't ask anything of the taxpayers, she said.
And she's absolutely right about that.
Until you're more efficient.
She's absolutely right about that.
Right.
You've got to do all the hard things before you go ask taxpayers again.
So you're in agreement. That you
Well,
would
as
be in
a
agreement.
concept,
Yeah.
correct. Now the question is going to be, Lori, can you do enough of efficiency to even make a dent
Well,
in the
she-
problem?
here's what
and,
she
and
said.
the problem is you can't.
Well, you're in agreement on that, okay? Because she said, okay, once you've done that, once you've gotten police misconduct in hand, so you don't have these wasteful actions that require wasteful settlements with people who've been abused or, you know, hurt and taken advantage of, mistreated by the Chicago police. Once you've settled all, once you've gotten the police trained under the new consent decree, okay? That's better. You've done a few other things. Now you're more efficient. Now she's been there for a year, been some changes. She said, you know, Jeff, you have a revenue issue here in Chicago. And if somebody says you don't have a revenue issue, they're not serious or they're naive.
And there you go. There's the difference. So Chicagoans pay lots of taxes. And if you look at the fees and other taxes they pay besides property taxes, it's pretty high. Now, it's lower than some of the other big cities, but then again, we're a Midwestern city, right? The
Like
problem
what
is
would it be lower than? You have any
well, lower
cities?
than New York, right? You have New York, San
Per
Fran.
capita,
of
we're
course,
lower?
San Fran, you're going to have high property taxes.
Okay. But we're higher than some other cities. Any
Oh yeah, we're higher, and
like
we're
any
certainly
examples?
high in Illinois.
Any higher? But okay, so Chicago is high in Illinois.
But let me bring this to the point that Lori
Go ahead.
Lori
Okay.
and Preckwinkle need to understand.
Yeah.
Tony Preckwinkle, is forget all these big billion numbers. They're too big. Nobody gets what they are, other than they're huge. Look at what each household is on the hook for. A Chicago household, right? One household is on the hook for the city pensions. They're on the hook for the Chicago public school pensions. They're on the hook for Cook County pensions. The park. They're on the hook for the state pensions. They're on the hook for the state retiree health care. And when you add them all up, each household is on the hook for the official number is $80,000 a household. The more appropriate, better estimate is what Moody's and other
Right.
rating agencies and banks say. It's about 140,000 a household.
On the
When-
average.
on the average. On the average. So when you
Average.
think about 140,000 mortgage sitting there for each single household, for services already rendered, not for new services, but for debts, a family has to say, why would I pay that? I can't stick around, or I can leave and not pay it. That's point number one. It's amazing how much that is. It's overwhelming.
Are they leaving?
Number two,
Okay.
that's an average,
That's an average.
right? So when you look at the poverty level in Chicago and near poverty, you're talking about nearly 25%. Those people won't be able to pay a penny
Right.
of that debt. So now that debt that I talked about is not 140,000 per household, it's more. And then when you think about a lot of the households that probably don't have that much means, that means you're talking about a bigger and bigger number on a smaller subset of Chicagoans. Call it 300,000, call it 400,000 per household. Do they want to stick around to pay it?
So
How many will leave? So the point is for Lori Lightfoot, for Tony Preckwinkle,
Keep your search yourself.
they need to think about how the heck do I solve that debt problem
Okay.
without losing people? Because if they do anything that keeps chasing people out, the whole debt stays in Illinois, in Chicago, but the number of people who pay it are fewer and fewer.
So that cost goes up because at one point Chicago, not too long ago, had 3 million people. Now it's a little less than 2.8 million people.
2.7. Now,
Yeah,
let me bring up
2.7.
something. Let me bring up
So-
something. You're bringing up a great point. That the one interesting thing that I heard from Daley during the campaign was
Bill Daley.
Bill Daley. He wanted to have a goal of getting the city back to over 3 million people, 300,000 more people. And I
Yeah.
love that thinking because that thinking is different. That thinking is saying what it should have been is what policies do we follow and promote so that we attract more people and more businesses still to Chicago. Instead, another way is what things should we not do to chase more of our
Well,
people
Lori,
and businesses away?
But to be fair, and we can slide into another area you know something about. Well, okay, let me just mention it and we'll come back.
But that thinking, Jeff, is critical to how you fix it for Chicago.
You have to want
Because
to
if you
attract
don't,
people, right?
if you don't change your thinking and say, how do we grow? How do we attract? How do we keep?
Right.
If your mentality is, how do we tax more? How do we raise more fees and services and commuter fees? Your policies are chasing more people away and making things worse, even though you might get more revenues in the
But
short
you
term.
have something in common with Lori because she has said one reason why people are leaving Chicago is it's not safe, so we have to do something. She says low-income people on the south and west side want the same things that people want in other areas of the city that may be more affluent. They want safety. And when you have, in one weekend, as we had a few months ago, 84 shootings and 12 fatalities, in portions of the city of Chicago, south and west side, not good. So she says, yeah, we got to, and the schools aren't good. And, and we're sending kids 5 miles away, she said. We've got to give people the choice, use that word, choice, of going to a good school in their neighborhood. Does she have that right, Ted?
She has that right. Now the question is, what's a school? Too many people defend public schools, where I like to talk about any kind of school. A parent should be able to send their kid to any kind of school. But Jeff, before we talk a little bit about schools,
Let's go back. I just want to point out you had some agreement.
it's
She was
interesting.
thinking about bringing people into Chicago and not leaving, and you said that's a key thing about Bill Daley. He wants to bring 300,000 more people to Chicago.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what number, but she wants to bring more people.
Well, that's good. Now,
And just to be fair,
But-
I imagine we've left Tony Preckwinkle out of this discussion. She had the support of Chicago Teachers Union. She had the support of SEIU, a lot of union support. But to be fair, I think Tony would say there have to be some improvements in the schools, and she wants to make them, and she wants to attract people. So it's not, the three of you, Lori, Tony, and Ted Dabrowski, 3 peas in a pod on wanting to bring people into Chicago.
so then you have to look at their policies they proposed, right? And
Yeah, okay.
until they change their policies into something that's more business friendly and people friendly, we'll continue to lose people, just like we're doing in Illinois. Here's an important point, and we're going to publish this at some point. We were looking at the last 10 years of the finances in Chicago. And what's fascinating is how pensions have become dominant in the expenditures. And if you look at the rest, they're all going down, right? So
In Chicago.
In Chicago. So when you're talking about transportation, when you're talking about things like crime, education, it's hard to get more money there when the pensions are consuming more and more and more, and they will continue to consume
How
more.
much do they consume now? Can you give us a ballpark figure?
Well, they consume right now over like 1.2 billion out of 7 billion.
So the
Okay.
budget sometimes is said to be 10 billion. Some people say 7 billion.
7 to 8.
Is there an easy way to tell us what's the difference? Why do some people use 10, some 7,
that
8?
doesn't matter right now.
That's a
Yeah,
detail.
what matters right now is
so it's
what
1
matters is
billion
that-
out of 7.
What-
In other words, it's 1/7 of their budget roughly
Well-
is going to pension payments. Do I
well,
have that right?
of that number. Depends on how you slice it, but let's just
Which would be
say,
about 14%.
let me say this, that the pension payments are up, property taxes are up about 66% in the last decade.
In the
It's
last
a
decade,
It's a very large
66%.
increase, all of it going to pensions.
That's an average. Property taxes are going up 66%.
well, period to period,
over,
okay?
over the last decade.
Right. And they would need to go up another, as we know, another billion to pay for the amount necessary to pay the amount in about 4
do they
years.
explain?
2023.
When is that?
It's in about 2023.
And why is it they need another billion?
Well,
Who decided that?
That's what the actuaries require in order, and the state statute.
It's now a statute.
Yes.
And
So
what
that's
year?
it-
So by 2023,
By 2023.
we're currently paying about $1 billion, and in the next 4 years, that annual payment will be sort of going up year by year. But by 2023, we will need $2 billion for pensions.
Right, if we're at 2.2
as a-
now, we'll be at, sorry, if we're at
2.2.
1.2 billion now, we'll be at 2.2 billion.
So
But let me-
now
let me-
we're,
but
now
let me
we're
explain
at
this, Jeff.
that will be 2/7 of the budget,
So-
or I don't know, what is that?
Well, you have to,
That's like
don't get into that
28,
detail, Jeff, because it
25%.
gets too complex. But the point is this.
Just math.
The point is this, is
Yeah.
that we just had a massive tax hike in Chicago, property tax hike. We will need another 1.5 of those to try to reach that $1 billion number. So Chicagoans should prepare if Tony Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot don't want to talk about pension reforms, if they don't want to talk about a constitutional amendment to pensions, then Chicagoans should prepare for another huge round of taxes.
Property taxes, or
well-
can they
well-
do it like a?
well-
They want to have a tax on plastic bags, and a
You'll-
tax on water.
You'll never
They
get
could
there.
nickel and dime people to death.
They've already nickel denied people. They can still do that. Trust me, they will. Right? They're already talking about those
User
things.
fees and all those things. Okay, yeah.
Both Tony and Lori have talked about getting some of the progressive tax increase that Pritzker wants to do.
What does that mean?
So when there's a progressive tax increase at the state level, they want a larger share of it. Okay, they want a share of it.
Chicago should get some of this windfall that the state's going to get.
I wouldn't call it a windfall, but yes.
Briefly, what is the progressive tax? J.B. Pritzker wants this, right?
Well, yeah, J.B. Pritzker wants.
What does he have to do before he can get it?
He has to have a constitutional amendment to allow for a progressive tax, move away from the flat tax system we have today to a progressive. And if he gets his way, then Chicago wants to make sure they get their share. Now, we forget that the state is broke, right? We have the same discussion we would be having, that we're having about Chicago, it's the same for the state. So when the state wants more money and Pritzker wants more money, he's talking about raising money for the state.
For the state.
But you got other people saying, well, we want a cut of that. So that means that the taxes would have to go even higher to make sure that Chicago can get its cut too.
Well, should
and not
somebody
Chicago,
else?
but Rockford and everybody
Does
else.
Rockford get a cut? Does
Well, they'll
Peoria
want-
get a cut?
They'll
Does
want more of it as
Naperville
well.
get a cut?
Everybody will want more. So this is the problem we have. It's
So what kind of tax rates are we talking about if we go to a progressive tax?
well, if you look at what Governor Pritzker has promised, right, and if you add it all up, and guys like Rich Miller at Capital Facts and others have added it up, and it's at least $10 billion more.
In
Then you're
revenue?
talking in revenue, right? That
Can
would
we
be,
just tax the top 1%? Those little guys, because Lori would agree with you. She says these people, they don't have it. You cannot put more property taxes and balance things on the backs of the low-income, hardworking people of Chicago. You go to those fat cats, like, in the Loop on LaSalle Street. We could have a LaSalle Street tax.
right? And that's
So why can't we do that, Ted? Can't we just get it from the top 1 or 2%?
You can't. I mean, there's not enough of them, first of all. Two, they can all leave. It's a very mobile, digital world today. And when you're talking about finance, the wealthy guys have their accountants, guys and gals, they have their accountants.
You think
their
they'd
lawyers.
leave Chicago?
Well, some of them. You don't need all of them to leave. You need lots of
Or
them.
leave Illinois? Worse, this progressive tax, they leave Illinois, so Springfield has less to give Chicago. We're in trouble, right?
Let's remember, Jeff, let's use a couple other facts.
Okay.
Illinois shrunk 5 years in a row. It's the only state besides West Virginia and Connecticut to shrink 5 years in a
Eleanor,
row.
what about Chicago?
Well, Chicago shrunk as well.
How many
right?
years did it get?
Chicago was the only metropolitan city of the top cities in 2016 to 2017 to shrink.
It's the only one in this.
Only
that,
one
that
of the
fiscal
top
period,
metropolitans. Right.
Only one.
And we shrunk. Chicago shrunk 3 years in a row. You can't keep assuming that people will stay no matter what you do.
Okay, so what do we do?
And so
Go
this
ahead,
is
sir.
important.
Yeah, okay.
It's probably the most important thing is that people can leave and will leave, and they've been leaving.
Well, Lori must know that. She went to the University of Michigan, a really good school. She went to the University of Chicago Law School. I mean, you know, Toni Preckwinkle's a smart woman. She's been an alderman. She's familiar with the city problems. She was a high school teacher, you know. She's been Cook County Board President for 8 years. Everybody says she's done a great job because there was all this controversy and fighting before she came in. And now she would say the budget's balanced in Cook County government. Would you agree she's done a good job?
No, I think none of them have done a good job. None of them are lobbying and using the bully pulpit.
What do you mean by them? Who's them? You said none of them. Who's them?
Rahm,
Preckwinkle.
Preckwinkle. Right? And anybody, any
But
alderman?
Lori is new. She's fresh. She doesn't have a, she's not been, she was at the Chicago Police Board. We can go into those issues. But you can't blame her for the tax thing. You can't blame her for pay to play.
And I don't.
Yeah, because she's not been a part of that system, right?
What I've seen is her on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
Right? And so is she presenting a bold vision for Chicago?
Which would be what?
It would be, I'm going to fix the finances. I'm going to fix the finances without losing all of our people.
And how do you outline
Well,
that plan for
that again starts with demanding a constitutional amendment.
And what does that entail? How do you?
I'm going to give you an example of
okay,
something that was
okay,
really
okay,
good. That
okay.
you know, Rahm Emanuel gave a lot of promise at the very beginning when he came in.
In 2011.
I think it was 2012. He actually went to Springfield. He actually went to the State House, and you know, my history is not strong on that, but most mayors don't go down to the State House to demand things or ask for things. He actually asked for a freeze on COLAs of some kind. I can't remember.
Right now.
He actually asked
You
for
started trying to reform pensions.
401ks for new workers,
Okay, yeah.
and raising retirement ages. That was bold.
Had he talked to the Illinois Policy Institute? That was your guys'
No,
program,
he had not
wasn't
talked.
it?
You know, this is something that
He got it on his own.
He got it from somewhere.
Okay.
He did not get it from us
And you
directly.
like those ideas, right?
Well, they're at least transformational in terms of stopping the huge problems that Chicago has. Okay, but the problem with Rahm is that over time he got beaten down. He got rolled by the unions.
Well, what
and
happened,
effectively,
though?
he lost all of his reform.
No, but just take it. There was some legislation that did some of those things, right?
Eventually, there was SB 1.
And it was challenged in the courts, and probably by the unions, I imagine, right?
Sure.
And it went to the Illinois Supreme Court. And what did the Illinois Supreme Court
The Supreme
say?
Court said that you could not make those changes. That those pensions could
Because
not be
why?
because of the Constitution.
Which says you
can say
cannot diminish these pension payments. And there's an impairment of contracts. I think.
Exactly.
But the main thing was this no diminishment of pensions. Okay. So
So
now,
which brings
if you
us
want
back
to change the
which brings us back to
Constitution-
Lori Lightfoot.
Yeah.
You should be on the bully pulpit. Now, Bill Daley, to him, credit to him, he was the one that mentioned a constitutional amendment. And Rahm recently, of
Look
course,
where it got him. Look where it got. He was the only one
okay.
of the 14. Some people say he lost for that reason because, you know,
Well,
we
there's
said
a lot of other things
There
he-
were, but this was a close election. 17% went for Lightfoot, 16% for Preckwinkle, 15% for Daley. We're talking like 6,000 votes.
Now, I didn't say it was politically the best
Is
thing.
that-
I didn't say it was politically the best, right?
Yeah,
What I
so,
said,
yeah.
you're right, we're talking about what's the right policy. I said Lightfoot, if she wants to.
Needs
I
to do
forget how
that.
you-
Okay,
you know,
she
you
needs
need-
to start thinking about amending the Constitution. Just tell people, what does that entail?
That entails you have to have a 3/5 vote.
First, you have
by
to
the
get it. You have
legislature,
to get it
by-
on the ballot.
Well, you have to get a 3/5
here's-
vote on the legislature that they want a progressive tax.
To put it on the ballot.
To put it on the ballot, and then it needs to meet a majority by the voters.
And you just have to, the wording, we won't get detailed, other than it says, right now, our Constitution says, right now, as we've said, the Constitution says you cannot diminish payments. So if you just remove that clause, it doesn't say what you can do, there's nothing in there that says you can't diminish payments. That's one way of amending it, right?
That's right.
And then it goes, so the legislature has to do that, which is tough because people say Speaker Madigan doesn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
He's captured by the unions, and he controls anything that even gets presented to the legislature. okay? Doesn't go to the House. Cullerton probably agrees. But if you then got it somehow, if you persuaded Madigan and Cullerton and their super majorities and Republicans,
Well-
so if you got it to the people and then it was on the ballot, you need 60% again, right, of the people voting, right?
You need a majority.
Is it just a majority? Okay.
But here's the
but then when that
important- here's the
happens,
important
but then
point.
when, excuse me, just when that happens, once you pass that, Bill Daley said, I'm not telling you what it should be. He said to have an honest conversation about reducing these benefits with the unions and the city sitting down like we are, you got to first amend the Constitution, and then we'll figure out what it should be. We don't know. Then you can negotiate, right?
Right.
Okay.
You know, so that's a lot of detail for now.
Okay.
What we need to do is move towards that because we can't do anything with the Constitution and the Supreme Court ruling. So we need to get an amendment to give us a shot.
What else do
Number
we need
one.
to do? Okay.
Number two is the collective bargaining agreements, and those are the laws and the agreements that give the unions the power. Okay, the power to negotiate. They're way too much skewed towards the power of the unions and against the normal taxpayer. And I'll give you the example.
Okay.
We're the only state around us that gives the teachers the power to strike. So if the unions don't like what they see, they can strike. And it gives them huge bargaining power
If we took that away, the unions, the teacher unions that have sort of a local monopoly around the state, and including in Chicago, if CTU, Chicago Teachers Union, couldn't strike, they'd have a lot less power.
So the point is,
and we might have
the
more
point
reasonable
is-
contracts.
The point is, give the power back to the people, not to the unions. And,
Gotcha.
and
Okay.
we negotiate better deals.
What else?
Right now, the Chicago teachers are the highest paid in the
We
nation.
only got about 2 minutes
Chicago
left.
teachers are the highest paid in the nation.
Okay.
And we don't get the results for it.
Yeah, the
So
median
you-
salary is over
So
$70,000.
you've got to get the power back to the people. That's
Okay.
that's a good example. So the constitutional amendment,
Yeah.
right, and the collective bargaining. Those two things will go a long way
What
towards
else?
that.
Because in 2 minutes, I think, Ted, I've heard you say, well, once you're trying to negotiate these things, if you can't, and after you've amended the Constitution, if the city of Chicago had the power to file for bankruptcy, well, then the unions maybe would be more agreeable, because if there's a threat of bankruptcy where the judge can say, I got the power, folks, a plan has been presented, and you unions are going to have to get reduced
Well, let me hit that
benefits.
point. Let me hit that point. Everything we've talked about just now,
Yeah.
constitutional amendment, doesn't seem to be in either of the candidates' language. Well, I
Right.
know it's not. They both said it, that they oppose it.
Say that happened, okay.
Collective bargaining,
Yeah.
they will not support, because
Okay.
especially Preckwinkle, she's
What
supported
about the
by
right to
unions.
file for bankruptcy?
So, what I would argue, and my colleague Mark Lennon, we argue that the city must have the power and the right and the option to file for bankruptcy. Because if we're not going to do anything else, then we better be prepared at some point for that
How do you-
moment.
how
And
do we-
especially Jeff, we have to realize that we've ridden a 9-year rally on the stock market in a pretty decent economic growth.
And who-
when
who-
that's over, Chicago pensions, if you look at them, we put out a piece today. If you look at the Chicago pensions,
Where do they find that?
wirepoints.com.
Okay.
If you look at the pensions, they will not survive a hard period of low stock market growth and a recession.
Okay. And the power to file for bankruptcy has to come from the legislature. If
Correct.
the Illinois legislature passes, I guess with just a majority,
It's just a
all
law.
cities and villages would have the right in the state. Chicago then is a city, they would have the right.
Mhm.
Bam. Well, we're going to have you back because we only have about 20 seconds left. What have we missed? And then we'll have Ted Dabrowski back.
I think
from Wire Points, you can find Ted, you can find Ted Dabrowski, you can find Mark Lennon, you can find John
Klingner.
These threesome, they're cited all over, Manhattan Institute, Wall Street Journal. You guys have been around for just a few years. But anyway, so you can find all that. You come back, and you come back next week and every week to Public Affairs.